Governor Pritsker, for the first time, calling for the removal of President Trump from office.
This on the same day the president said dangerous cities like Chicago should be used as training grounds for the military.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military, because we're going into Chicago.
There is a specific kind of silence that falls over Washington right before the machinery of history grinds its gears and snaps something that can never be put back together. We lived in that silence for about an hour this afternoon, and then, with a violence that I don't think any of us were fully prepared for, the noise began. And frankly, looking at the images coming out of the Capitol tonight, looking at the security perimeter that looks more like the Green Zone in Baghdad than the seat of American democracy, the noise is deafening. What happened tonight wasn't just news. It wasn't just a headline. It was the definitive, catastrophic breach of the dam that has been holding back the truth for 8 long, exhausting years. We need to be incredibly precise about what just occurred because the history books are going to spend chapters analyzing the next 12 hours. House Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, 2 men who politically inhabit different planets, 2 men whose ideologies are usually matter and antimatter, walked onto the floor of a joint emergency session and did the unthinkable. They didn't just stand together. They didn't just issue a statement. They passed a bipartisan resolution demanding that Donald Trump immediately end his term through resignation. Let's strip away the cable news varnish and look at the raw mechanics of this because the numbers tell a story of political hemorrhage. The final tally was 265 to 170. But the number you need to burn into your mind, the number that is currently causing panic attacks inside Mar-a-Lago, is 45. 45 Republicans. 45 members of the party that Donald Trump remade in his own golden, gaudy image. 45 conservative lawmakers who looked at the evidence, looked at the chaos, looked at the precipice the president was dragging the country toward, and decided to push him off instead of jumping with him. This is not a breaking news alert. This is a regime collapse. When you have nearly a quarter of the House Republican caucus crossing the aisle to tell their own president that his time is up, you are no longer watching a political dispute. You are watching a mutiny. You are watching the survival instinct of the political animal kicking in. These aren't moderates. These aren't the never-Trumpers we've heard about for years. These are people who voted for his tax cuts, who defended his phone calls to Ukraine, who looked the other way on January 6th the first time around. And tonight, they looked at the polling, they looked at the court orders, and they looked at the crowd size outside, and they realized that Donald Trump is no longer an asset. He is an anchor. And they just cut the chain. The visual of Mike Johnson is the most forensic piece of evidence we have that the Trump era is effectively over, even if Trump himself hasn't accepted it yet. Mike Johnson was the architect of the legal defense for overturning the 2020 election. He was the loyal soldier. He was the MAGA intellectual, if such a phrase can be used without irony. For Mike Johnson to stand on the rostrum of the House and demand Trump's resignation is not just a betrayal. It is a signal flare to the entire conservative establishment that the protection racket is closed. The Speaker of the House does not make this move unless he knows 2 things. First, that the ship is sinking, and second, that he has enough lifeboats for himself. The language of the resolution itself warrants a forensic autopsy because Congress does not use words carelessly. The text explicitly states that immediate voluntary relinquishment is urged and warns that failure to comply constitutes an abdication crisis. Let's pause on that term. Abdication crisis. That is not constitutional boilerplate. That is a very specific legal theory being road-tested in real time. By using the word abdication, Congress is building a legal argument that a president who refuses to follow court orders, a president who barricades himself in a private club while the country burns, has not just committed crimes, he has vacated the office in spirit and capacity. They are arguing that he has abandoned the job, leaving the seat empty even if his body is still occupying the chair. This is the framework for what comes next. They are setting the stage to declare the presidency vacant not because of impeachment, but because of abandonment. And how did the president respond? Did he appeal for calm? Did he present a legal defense? No. He did exactly what the darkest assessments of his psyche predicted he would do. He went on a live stream from Mar-a-Lago, and he poured gasoline on a fire that was already threatening to consume the Capitol. We watched it live. It was the most unhinged, dangerous, and terrified we have ever seen him. He was sweating, screaming, calling individual members of Congress traitors by name. He declared that his term ends when he says it ends, asserting a kind of monarchical privilege that we fought a revolution to reject. But then, he said the words that have changed the security posture of every police department in this country tonight. He looked into the camera and said, "Civil war starts now." We cannot normalize that. We cannot let that just wash over us as Trump being Trump. The sitting president of the United States, facing a lawful demand from a co-equal branch of government to step down, publicly instructed his followers to commence a civil war against their own countrymen. In the eyes of the law, that is not protected speech. That is incitement to imminent lawless action. That is a clear and present danger. And it tells you everything you need to know about his priorities. Donald Trump would rather see American blood running in the streets than see himself lose power. He would rather fracture the union than face a jury. The reaction on the ground in Washington, D.C. is the physical manifestation of this rhetoric. The city is locking down. We are talking about 200,000 protesters swarming the streets. That is an army. It dwarfs the crowd we saw on January 6th. And unlike last time, the mood is not just celebratory or angry. It is desperate. The clash between pro-Trump elements answering his call for war and anti-Trump demonstrators demanding his removal has turned the streets into a combat zone. The Capitol building itself had to be evacuated. Just think about that image. The resolution passed, the votes were counted, and then the people's representatives, the men and women we elected to govern this nation, had to be escorted by armed guards through underground tunnels to secure black sites because the president's mob was breaching the perimeter. This is the state of our union tonight. Members of Congress voting to save the country and then fleeing underground to save their lives. The riot emergency declaration has now been expanded to cover the entire District of Columbia. The National Guard is fully mobilized under federal control, but the chain of command is murky when the commander-in-chief is the one inciting the violence they are deployed to stop. This is the nightmare scenario constitutional scholars have warned us about for decades. What happens when the threat to the Republic is coming from inside the Oval Office, and the contagion is spreading beyond D.C.? We have to talk about what is happening in Illinois because it perfectly illustrates the authoritarian mindset we are dealing with. Governor J.B. Pritsker has formally called for the removal of President Trump, joining the chorus of voices invoking the 25th Amendment. But why now? Why did Pritsker choose this moment? Because earlier today, Donald Trump explicitly threatened to use dangerous cities like Chicago as training grounds for the military. Let's parse that. Training grounds. He is talking about deploying the United States military into American cities, not to help with a natural disaster, not to distribute aid, but to run urban combat simulations against American citizens. He wants to send troops into sovereign states to intimidate populations that didn't vote for him. He specifically mentioned sending 100 troops to protect ICE agents, effectively turning federal law enforcement into a Praetorian Guard that operates outside local jurisdiction. Governor Pritsker sees this for exactly what it is, a soft invasion. It is an attempt to federalize the National Guard against the will of the state governor and use them to occupy American soil. Pritsker knows, and legal experts confirm, that he has the authority to refuse unlawful orders. But the fact that a governor even has to consider refusing a presidential order to invade his own state shows you how far off the map we have fallen. Trump is trying to bait governors into a kinetic confrontation. He wants the footage of federal troops clashing with local police. He wants the chaos. Chaos is the only environment where he thinks he can survive. But tonight, the system pushed back. That is the story that matters. The resolution passed by Congress is not just a piece of paper. It is the breaking of the spell. For years, the Republican Party operated under the delusion that they could ride the tiger without being eaten. Tonight, the tiger turned, and 45 Republicans decided to shoot it. They didn't do it out of bravery. They did it because the court orders, the testimony, and the sheer undeniable criminality of the last few days made it impossible to pretend anymore. The testimony that dropped earlier today provided the evidentiary bedrock for this mutiny. When you have officials under oath confirming that the president ordered evidence suppression, that he ordered political purges, that he treated the Department of Justice like his personal law firm, the wiggle room evaporates. You can spin a tweet. You can spin a rally speech. You cannot spin a federal judge finding probable cause for obstruction of justice. The Republicans who voted with Democrats tonight didn't suddenly grow a conscience. They suddenly realized that the legal walls were closing in on them too. They realized that if they didn't cut ties now, they would be named as co-conspirators later. And let's not overlook the financial collapse happening in parallel. At the very moment Trump was screaming about civil war, U.S. Marshals were at Mar-a-Lago executing fraud judgment liens. This is a Shakespearean level of downfall. He is losing the presidency and his property simultaneously. The Golden Gates are being chained shut by the very legal system he tried to destroy. This creates a psychological pressure cooker that makes him infinitely more dangerous. A man with nothing left to lose is a man capable of anything. That is why the Civil War comment is being treated with such deadly seriousness by the Pentagon and the FBI. The 25th Amendment is no longer a break glass in case of emergency option. The glass has been shattered. We know that Vice President Vance is in active communication with the cabinet. We know the conversations are happening. The resolution passed by Congress gives the cabinet the political cover they need. It tells them, we, the legislative branch, have determined he is unfit. If you, the executive branch, act to remove him, we will support you. It unifies the government against the man at the top. It isolates the infection so the body can survive. But the clock is ticking. Every hour that Trump remains in power with access to the nuclear codes and the ability to issue commands to the military is an hour where the republic is in jeopardy. The evacuation of the Capitol wasn't just a precaution. It was an admission that the government is under siege. We have 200,000 people in the streets, and the sun hasn't even come up yet. The National Guard is standing post at the Lincoln Memorial. The bridges into the city are being monitored. This is what the end of a regime looks like. It is messy, it is scary, and it is fraught with the potential for violence. The tragedy here is that it didn't have to be this way. This could have been handled through the normal mechanisms of accountability years ago. But the system hesitated. The system gave him the benefit of the doubt. The system hoped he would pivot. Tonight, the system has run out of hope and is running on adrenaline. The bipartisan nature of the vote, and I cannot stress this enough, destroys the witch hunt narrative. When Mike Johnson tells you to go, it's not a witch hunt. It's an eviction. We need to understand the gravity of the next few hours. The President of the United States has declared war on the mechanisms of his own government. He has called for his supporters to rise up. He has threatened to invade Chicago. He is barricaded in a Florida club that is currently being seized by the government. This is a man in free fall, clawing at the curtains on his way down, trying to take the whole house with him. The fact that Congress had to flee through tunnels to vote on his removal is the defining image of this presidency. It started with carnage, and it is ending with carnage. But it is ending. That is the critical takeaway. The vote happened. The record is established. The timeline has shifted from if to when. The only question remaining, and it is a terrifying one, is how much damage he can do between now and the moment the power is finally stripped from his hands. This is a test. It is the ultimate stress test of the American experiment. Can a democracy remove a leader who refuses to go? Can the rule of law constrain a man who believes he is the law? The answer appears to be yes, but the cost is going to be incredibly high. We are watching the immune system of the Constitution attack the virus, but the fever is spiking. And until that fever breaks, until the transfer of power is secured, none of us can afford to look away. This is not a political game anymore. This is a struggle for the survival of the rule of law. If you are watching this, you need to understand that your subscription to this channel, your engagement with this reality, is part of the fight. The algorithms want to feed you distraction. We are here to feed you the raw, unfiltered truth of a nation on the brink. We need you to stay with us, to share this, to be the witnesses that history requires. Because if we blink now, if we let the disinformation take hold, we lose. So here is the situation. Congress has spoken. The mutiny is real. The breach has happened. The president has called for civil war. And the people, you, me, the 200,000 outside, are the only thing holding the line. Don't look away. Stay right here. The next 12 hours will decide the next 100 years. This is the John Brown Show, and we are not going anywhere. Let's look at the arithmetic of political death. 265 to 170. 45 Republicans crossing the aisle. But the only metric that actually matters right now is the visual of House Speaker Mike Johnson standing next to Chuck Schumer. Johnson, the man who spent years as the architect of Trump's defense, the man who provided the legislative armor for MAGA's worst impulses, didn't just pivot tonight. He capitulated to reality. When the Republican Speaker of the House stands on the floor and demands a Republican president's resignation, the presidency is already over. The rest is just the dangerous logistics of removal. This was a bipartisan exorcism performed on national television. The resolution they passed is not symbolic. It contains a specific, terrifying legal term that you need to understand: abdication crisis. Words have power in constitutional law. Abdication is distinct from resignation. Resignation is a choice. Abdication is a verdict. It implies that by refusing to enforce the law, by rejecting court orders, and by inciting violence against the state, Donald Trump has already vacated the oath of office. Congress is not asking him to leave. They are codifying the fact that he has already abandoned the post through his own belligerence. This resolution provides the constitutional cover for the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment within hours. It is the legislative branch handing a loaded weapon to the executive branch to finish the job. But why the sudden urgency? Why the panic in the tunnels under the Capitol? Because the threat has mutated from political obstruction to kinetic military danger. Look at what is happening with Governor Pritsker in Illinois. Trump didn't just insult Chicago. He issued a directive to use an American city as a live-fire training ground for military operations. He is attempting to federalize the National Guard not to protect the border, but to occupy American streets. This is the crossing of the Rubicon. He is trying to force a governor to turn state troops against their own constituents to protect ICE facilities and suppress dissent. Pritzker's refusal to comply with an illegal order is the only thing standing between us and martial law. The system is holding, but the strain is audible. The commander-in-chief is hunting for a private army because the regular military will not break their oath. And how does a tyrant respond when the institutions close in? He doesn't lawyer up, he burns it down. Trump's response on the Mar-a-Lago livestream, screaming "Civil War starts now," was not a metaphor. It was a command. Law enforcement agencies are treating that statement as an active engagement of domestic terrorism protocols. He is trying to operationalize the mob because he has lost the generals. The scene in Washington reflects this chaos. The People's House is empty, evacuated through secure tunnels usually reserved for nuclear strikes because the president has turned the seat of democracy into a target. Simultaneously, at Mar-a-Lago, federal marshals are seizing assets to satisfy civil fraud judgments. Watch the convergence. He is losing his liquidity and his legitimacy in the same heartbeat. The 45 Republicans who voted to oust him didn't do it out of newfound morality. They did it because they looked at the actuarial tables of their own survival and realized Trump is a sinking ship that is on fire. They are throwing him overboard to save the party, but it is likely too late. We are watching the autopsy of a regime performed on a living patient. The establishment has severed the cord. The courts have seized the assets. The military has refused the illegal orders. All that remains is the desperate, violent thrashing of a man who knows the immunity is gone. The fever is spiking, and the next few hours will determine if the republic survives the cure. You need to understand that the algorithms are trying to bury this reality under a mountain of distraction. Do not let them. We are documenting the fall of a king who would rather rule over ashes than serve in a democracy. Hit that subscribe button not for us, but to force this truth into the feed of someone who needs to see it. We are the only signal left in the noise.